There's a woman in Ohio who spent 11 months planning her own disappearance. And the strangest part is that nobody around her noticed a single thing. She still showed up to birthday dinners. She still laughed at her co-workers' jokes in the break room. She still texted her sister good morning every day. But underneath all of it, she was quietly closing bank accounts, printing documents at library computers instead of her home printer, and memorizing a new city's bus routes on her lunch break. By the time she actually left, she wasn't starting a new life. She was finishing one she had already built in secret, piece by piece, while everyone around her assumed nothing had changed. This is the part nobody talks about when they talk about people who reinvent themselves. We love the after, the dramatic reveal, the new name, the new city, the glow-up story. But almost nobody examines the psychology of the in-between, the strange mental architecture required to live two lives at once, one performed for the people watching, and one built in the dark for yourself. And once you understand what's actually happening in the mind of someone rebuilding in secret, you start to realize this isn't rare at all. It might be one of the most common human responses to pain that we simply never see, because by design, we're not supposed to. So what actually drives a person to do this? Why do some people, when life falls apart, choose to rebuild quietly instead of asking for help? The first thing to understand is that secrecy, in these cases, is rarely about deception for its own sake. It's about control. Psychologists who study identity reconstruction point to something called a compromised sense of agency. When someone has lived through a period where their choices were taken from them, whether through an abusive relationship, a controlling family system, a financial collapse, or public humiliation, the desire to rebuild without an audience isn't dishonesty. It's the nervous system's way of reclaiming the one thing that was stolen. If everyone is watching, everyone has an opinion, and an opinion, to someone rebuilding from nothing, can feel like another leash. Think about what it actually costs a person to announce their reinvention publicly. Every step becomes a performance graded by people who knew the old version of them. Lose the weight in public, and people whisper about why. Leave the marriage in public, and people pick sides before you've even processed your own grief. Start the business in public, and people wait, almost eagerly, for the moment it fails, so they can say they saw it coming. Humans are remarkably skilled at turning other people's transformation into entertainment. And on some level, the ones rebuilding in secret know this. So they remove the audience entirely, not because they're hiding something shameful, but because they're protecting something fragile. There's a particular psychological state researchers call the liminal self, the version of you that exists in the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. It's inherently unstable. You don't fully belong to your old identity anymore, but you haven't earned a new one yet either. And this in-between self is incredibly vulnerable to outside influence. A single doubtful comment from a parent, a single smirk from an old friend, can undo months of quiet progress, because the new identity hasn't hardened yet. It's still wet cement. People who rebuild in secret have often learned, sometimes through painful trial and error, that they need to let that cement dry before anyone is allowed to press their thumb into it. There's also something deeper going on, something tied to shame. Not the shame of what happened to them, but the shame of what people might think if they watch the process. Rebuilding a life is not glamorous while it's happening. It's eating the same cheap meal 5 nights in a row. It's crying a car in a parking lot before going back inside to pretend everything is fine. It's calculators, spreadsheets, second jobs, and silence. Nobody wants to be witnessed at their most fragile, and so the secrecy becomes a form of dignity. Let me be a mess in private. Let me only show up once I become someone I can stand behind. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Studies on people who've undergone major identity shifts, whether through leaving cults, escaping abuse, going through bankruptcy, or simply walking away from a life that no longer fit, show a common pattern in how they describe their secret rebuilding phase. They don't describe it as lying. They describe it as protecting a seed. You don't dig up a seed every day to check if it's growing. You water it, you leave it alone, and you trust the process, because constant exposure kills growth before it has a chance to root. That metaphor comes up again and again in interviews with people who've done this, almost word for word, as if some shared instinct is speaking through all of them. But secrecy has a cost too, and this is the part that makes the psychology so complicated. Living a double life. Even a benevolent one built for self-preservation creates a kind of chronic cognitive load. You are managing two narratives simultaneously, the one people see and the one that's real. And the human brain was not built to sustain that split indefinitely without strain. This is why so many people who rebuild in secret describe a specific moment, usually months or years in, where the secret life finally outweighs the public one, and they feel an overwhelming urge to either reveal everything or vanish completely. There's rarely an in-between. The psychological pressure of a hidden transformation tends to resolve itself in extremes, a dramatic reveal or a clean disappearance, because holding the middle ground becomes unsustainable. And maybe that's the most human part of this whole phenomenon. We assume secrecy is the opposite of connection, that hiding your rebuild means you don't trust anyone. But talk to people who've actually done it, and you hear something different. Most of them wanted to be seen. They just want to be seen after, not during. They wanted someone to witness the finished garden, not stomp through the mud while the roots were still forming. That's not a betrayal of the people who love them. In a strange way, it's an act of care, both for themselves and for the relationships they were trying to protect from the ugliest, most uncertain chapter of their becoming. So the next time you hear about someone who seemingly reinvented themselves overnight, remember that overnight is almost always a lie of perception. Somewhere behind that transformation is a person who spent quiet months or years managing two lives, protecting something fragile from judgment, and trusting a process nobody else was allowed to watch. It's not manipulation. It's not deceit. It's one of the oldest survival instincts we have, dressed up in a modern world that demands we document everything, refined by people who understood, instinctively, that some things only survive if they're allowed to grow in the dark first. If this kind of psychology fascinates you, the quiet, hidden mechanics behind how people actually change, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel goes deep into the minds of people the world never sees clearly until it's too late to look away. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever rebuilt something in your life without telling anyone until it was already done. I read every single one. And if you want more of this, hit like and stick around, because the next story might be the one that explains a part of your own life you never had the words for.